I was sitting in my empty rental, a too-big townhouse in Ashburn that belonged to a friend of mine who was letting me rent it for a steal. I had just left my husband, taking with me everything he let me have, which was pretty much the stuff I owned before meeting him, and my mom's dog, Doc. Doc was providing the soundtrack to my miserable first night alone in 7 years. A 30-pound border collie mutt with a broken tail that had healed at a horizontal 90-degree angle, and so much uncontainable energy that he vibrated in place on the rare occasion he wasn't running in circles. Doc paced nervously around the new home, his wails echoing throughout the empty, cavernous halls, making my misery that much more complete. As I stared at Doc, contemplating murder, I took comfort in the fact that he had to die soon. Doc had been my mom's dog. He was a year old when she had adopted him. He had been repeatedly beaten, run over with a car, and left for dead. It was a miracle he had even lived to be adopted. It was his that melted my mom's heart and made her choose him. Of course, when we got him home, we found out that he all the freaking time. Doc was my mom's constant companion and her sole companion for 9 years. Despite the whining, which continued, though thankfully was no longer incessant, Mom loved Doc, and he made her very happy. So when my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer, she, and of course Doc, came to live with me, my husband Jason, and our two 85-pound labs. Now, Doc was generally afraid of men, but he was especially afraid of men who did not like him, like Jason, and so he became an even tighter wound ball of nerves. My dogs, my beautiful, perfect labs, knew how to sit, stay, heal, and be quiet. Doc could not sit still for a second, running circles endlessly around our tiny living room, making my head spin. When I would take the dogs for a walk, my labs would walk alongside me, and Doc would try to commit suicide, choking himself at the end of the leash the entire time. And then there was his once again constant. My mom died 3 months after moving in with us, and Doc was left to me, despite Jason's hatred of the dog and our already full animal house. I tried to reassure Jason that he wasn't going to have to live with the crazy dog for long. I mean, Doc was 10 years old at this point. He had to die soon. But Doc showed no sign of slowing down, calming down, or quieting down in the meantime. Jason shunned Doc. It was his way of punishing the dog for existing, and me for having allowed this burden into our lives. And Jason never let me forget how much of a burden he considered Doc, complaining about him constantly. It got to the point where I actually came to prefer my mom's dog's cries to my husband's unsympathetic whining. It was about 2 years after my mom died that I found myself sitting alone in that townhouse, hating Doc for having been the third dog. If I hadn't had him, maybe I could have kept my dogs, my beautiful, perfect, quiet labs. But instead, I got stuck with the problem child, the one who just wouldn't die. But as much as Jason had hated the dog, my mom had loved Doc. And let's face it, at this point I was alone, but for the dog. So I decided to make the best of the situation and try to treat Doc like he was a real dog. I started taking him running with me. And without the other 2 dogs, he could almost heel, or at least not choke himself the whole time. Mealtime became less chaotic because I didn't have to rush Doc to finish his food before the labs got it. And he would always wait for me to sit down to eat before he'd sit down to eat. So it was like having a dinner companion. I'd take him to the park to play fetch. I'd throw the ball. He'd run and get the ball. He'd drop it on the way back, but it was almost a good trick. And whether it was because he became more comfortable with me or he just didn't have my ex-husband or my ex-dogs making him nervous, his whining became less constant. He'd still, whenever I'd come home, say the word walk, touch my keys or his food, but it was no longer incessant, and my ears were able to stop bleeding. About a year after I moved into that empty townhouse in Ashburn, I bought my very own townhouse in Reston. And I took on some roommates to help with the mortgage payments. And I gotta tell you, they loved Doc. I mean, he was still crazy, but they thought him adorable. Like when his running in circles would escalate and become leaping in circles. And yes, he still, but only when he was happy, like when Mommy had come home. For the next 3 years, Doc was my constant companion as roommates and boyfriends came and went. On my first unofficial, not quite really a date with my now husband, Bart came to the house for a movie night, and Doc took to him right away, sitting down next to him on the couch. As the movie progressed, Doc decided that some herding was in order, and he started sort of nudging Bart towards the center of the couch. And then he walked over both of us and did the same thing to me, so that by the end of the movie, Bart and I were snug up against each other, and I couldn't have loved Doc more. When I moved in with Bart, I got a great man, and Doc got a great big backyard, which he set to patrolling right away. We were a happy family. At 16 years old, Doc was diagnosed with kidney failure. The vet said he'd most likely only live another 6 months, but at this point, I didn't believe anything would ever kill this dog. True to form, it was nearly 2 years later when Doc finally started to slow down. I was pregnant with my first child when Doc, 18 years old, stopped eating or getting up. When we took Doc to the vet for what we knew would be the last time, he was too weak to stand. Bart had to carry him to the car. But of course, when we got to the vet's office and opened the car door, Doc leapt out and started running around, sniffing the grass, as happy as could be. I was thinking about changing my mind about going in the building, but Doc had been sick for weeks, and he hadn't eaten or gotten out of bed in days, and I knew This was temporary. Inside, the vet gave us a few minutes alone with our dog. I tried to say comforting things to him, but just sobbed into his fur. Doc stood and vibrated and I didn't want him to ever stop. When the vet came back into the room, we tried to get Doc to sit or lay down, but he hadn't learned how to do that in 18 years, so he stood while I held him, and they gave him the injection. 30 seconds later, he laid down forever. That first night, when I was alone in the townhouse with Doc, I was wrong to think I would be happy when he finally died, that he was the burden my mom had left me. Doc was my dog for 8 years, my family, my love until I found my husband, and my baby until I had my own. Doc was not a burden. He was the gift my mom left me, and for that I am forever grateful.